Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. I'm preparing to put in sweet peas, and it's always a significant moment of the year when you can put your sweet peas out. They're not entirely tender, but they don't like cold weather, and what you want them to do is to grow nice and fast and strong, so hopefully we can get some flowers next month. But they do need a support structure, and that means here in the dual garden I need to put up some bean sticks. Obviously you can grow beans up anything, but these are hazel sticks from coppiced hazel. But to be honest, you can use string, you can use wire, you can use trellis. It doesn't have to be terribly strong because sweet peas are not very heavy. And there's no doubt about it, these are overkill, but I like them. Okay, that can go in there. That in there, nice and firm. I'll get the other two in and then we'll be ready to plant. Now, coming up on today's programme, Nick travels to a garden in Devon that combines historic charm with modern design.
The gardens here are a great example of how carefully chosen modern planting can work perfectly in a traditional setting.
We visit the celebrated nurserywoman Derry Watkins to explore her garden ahead of her return to the RHS Chelsea Flower Show after an absence of 25 years.
I'm probably not known for the widest possible range of plants in the world, but I have the most exciting plants. The more unusual, the better. I'm always on the lookout for something new, something exciting. Oh, yes.
Arit is with Sarah Raven in East Sussex to discover how she's creating plants that are perfect for pollinators as well as our changing weather.
Blue Bayou is fantastic for red admiral butterflies.
Oh.
So when you come down here sometimes on a sunny evening, you know, it's like confetti almost. It's incredible.
And I will be planting out into the vegetable garden at last. Now, when it comes to planting sweet peas, you make a hole and you stick them in. This is a variety called Black Knight. It's a rich, dark purple. And I always plant them inside the support so that when I water, I can water into the middle and the roots will get access. Whereas if you plant them on the outside, they're competing with all the other plants on the outside too. If you've got very free draining soil, do add plenty of compost or manure to the soil before you plant. They do best in light shade. And also you need to plant them fairly near a path because above all, you want to pick them. A bunch of sweet peas in the house is such a luxury. It's sheer delight. The best sweet peas are bushy rather than straggly, because the bushier the plant, the more side shoots it will produce. And the more side shoots it produces, the more flowers it will have. So if your sweet peas you've grown, or if you buy any, are longer than about 6 to 8 inches, take them back by half. Pinch them out just above a pair of leaves. Having planted them, water them in well, and don't let them dry out. And you will have to tie them in for the first month or so, and then they'll start to develop sufficient tendrils to be self-clinging. Now, these won't start flowering for another 6 weeks or so, but at the moment the tulips are holding the show. And Nick has been to a garden near Honiton in Devon, where the tulips are at their glorious best.
Simple, elegant and dramatic, tulips exude a glorious celebration of colour. And at this special time of year, they create an eye-popping display in this garden in a pocket of the Devonshire countryside. The gardens here at Southwood Farm are a great example of how carefully chosen modern planting can work perfectly in a traditional setting. And they beautifully demonstrate my passion. A clever planting plan designed to showcase flowers, shrubs and trees to dramatically transform them from individual plants into a magnificent display. In this central courtyard area, the tulips are at their most dense and at their most beautiful. And I think all of these borders work brilliantly because of the simple rhythm and repetition of repeating a select set of tulips all the way through. Then it binds the whole garden together. And the choice of tulips here is very clever. It's a beautiful palette of near black, white and pink. The plants that have been selected here are all perennial. So Queen of Night, which is the really nearly black coloured tulip, and then white triumphator will both come back year after year. So they're really worthwhile investment to put in your borders so they just keep returning. There's also some beautiful colour associations happening. So down here where there's Queen of Night and white triumphator, there's Anthriscus ravenswing. And so it picks up the dark foliage and the white flowers and just combines beautifully. The garden's also been very carefully composed in terms of succession. There, of course, is the moment now where all the tulips are at their zenith, but shortly to follow on afterwards are the alliums. They're just in bud now. They'll be followed on by the foxgloves. Then there's phlox through the garden for midsummer, and then finally coming into autumn, there's anemones, which will give that last kind of burst of colour. It's a very carefully composed garden, beautiful mix of planting. I absolutely love it. Spread over 5 acres surrounding this historic thatched yeoman's house, the gardens were designed by Arnie Maynard 14 years ago. What he created was a cohesive space which connects the garden with the landscape around it. An element of this garden which I think works absolutely brilliantly is the use of garden architecture. These Taxus cubes, and they have a brilliant relationship with the building in terms of their formality and their shape. They also, let me show you this fantastic vista which passes all the way through the house and out into gardens on the other side. And they also create a very specific effect when you're walking through the garden. When you've got wide open space beside you like this, it's almost a bit like the foxtrot. You've kind of got the slow bit here and then it comes in. So it's quick, quick, and then slow again. You get to see, you know, the beautiful planting either side, and it just slows down your movement. I think it's just done brilliantly. Coming out of the walled garden, you're greeted by this much more naturalistic space. It has to be said, its genius is in its simplicity. It's just a series of earthworks with this snaking path, but it slowly transitions you up to the next level of the garden. And what's growing here are effectively kind of meadow natives just doing their own thing. And actually something really lovely has happened down here. If you grow our 2 native primulas in the same kind of area, so that's Primula vulgaris and Primula veris, what can sometimes happen is that they will hybridize. And here is their offspring. So it's got the colour of vulgaris, the form of veris, but it's very much a plant in its own right. And that kind of magic thing happens. It has hybrid vigour, so it tends to be a super healthy, floriferous plant that will last for many, many years. And then coming into this last section of the snake path, there's one non-native introduction, and it's this beautiful red tulip. It's Aximensis, and it's just scattered through the rest of the meadow planting here. Now, it comes from the alpine regions of France, and it much prefers a sort of damp condition, so it's really happy growing amongst these natives, and I think just finishes off this fantastic space. It's been 14 years since the owner, Clive Potter, decided to transform the gardens. Today, they're maintained by head gardener Lewis O'Brien, who's introduced some ideas of his own. How closely have you been able to stick to Arnie Maynard's original vision for the site?
I think it's quite key to the garden that we do that. How it sits in a landscape is key to the garden as a whole. So with the plantsmanship, I'd like to just tweak areas in the garden that perhaps as I see it could be worked a little harder. Getting the self-sowers in, but it's a restrained approach. So with a Beth's poppy, the lovely soft pink of the poppy in the front court there, and it floats above the tulips, which is a wonderful addition, I think.
I just think one of the most beautiful, delicate little poppies, and it's quite unusual. You don't tend to see it in many gardens.
We see it as a choice plant, I certainly do. And it's lovely to sow things in the autumn and plant them out in the depths of February and see them come good at this time of year. So yeah, it's been a real winner.
I really like the way this damp meadow has been planted up. It kind of creates the perfect transition between the formal garden over here and the wider landscape out the other side. And the thing that makes it so clever for me is this planting feels naturalistic, it feels a bit wild, but actually these are two cultivated plants. It's tulipa, peppermint stick, and it's camassia running all the way through, so they enjoy those damp conditions, but because they're naturally scattered through, they feel quite soft. And the other thing that's going on here, which I think is absolute genius, is the fact that these beech trees have been clipped down into domes. So they tie back into the domes of the formal garden, but then they link to the wild beech out in the wider landscape. It's just so carefully thought about, and it works brilliantly. Beautifully combining historic with modern and wild with formal. This garden is a true inspiration.
I love that combination of a really tightly controlled formality with beautifully clipped hedges and trees, and yet the softness and the looseness underneath it and weaving in amongst it. I also really liked the way that the camassias were planted in clumps rather than spread. In fact, camassias always look good in rich, lush grass. Those are the conditions they like best. But perhaps they grow too well to put in a border. We've got them here in the orchard beds, and of course they do look dramatic with their wonderful, slightly luminescent blue, mauvey flowers. But the foliage of camassias is very strappy, very strong, and slow to die back, which means that after the flowers are finished, you've got a mass of this foliage which suppresses other plants and also rather dominates the look of the border. So plant them in grass, yes, but in a border, I would resist the temptation. At this time of year, there are seedlings everywhere. Some of them are a delight, some of them you didn't know you had, they come from other parts of the garden. Some of them are in the wrong place. For example, have a look at this. That there is a purple hazel, and that's just appeared in the last day. Now, I suspect that's a hazelnut from the trees in the jewel garden that has been put there by a squirrel or a jay and buried and has popped up. Now, I don't want that there because, much as I like purple hazels, I don't want a socking great hazel tree in the path. So that can come up. How sweet is that? A little hazel tree, which I can pot up and grow on. Now here you can see the fluffy foliage of fennel. But I like fennel, and I like the way it grows randomly. And that's really one of the joys of seedlings in fairly loose, informal planting like this. Let them be, let them happen and enjoy them. So for example, over there, on the path, in amongst the bricks, we've got some cowslips growing. Now, I think they look great. Now, this isn't much to look at for the moment, but you can see the distinctive foliage of an aquilegia, slightly stained with purple and chocolate, and I love aquilegias. And we have them all over the garden. And one of the reasons we have them all over the garden is because they do self-seed prolifically. And they seem to prefer the edges of things. You can see how this is right hard up against the wooden edging. And not only do they self-seed prolifically, but they hybridize all the time. So sometimes you get wonderful variations So I let them flower, not always as good as I want them to be, but often sheer delight. But there's no reason why you couldn't move it. If you've got a seedling like this in your garden, just carefully lift it up and reposition it where you want it. And in fact, although I'm going to leave this, that's exactly what I'm going to do with another seedling that I've got over there. Now I've noticed here a self-sown Alchemilla mollis. Alchemilla mollis works well almost in every garden, but it's got a particular yellowy, greeny tinge to the flowers. So it is perfect for the effects that I'm trying to build up on the mound. So I'm going to dig this up and transplant it over at the mound. The soil is still very wet and claggy. And the beauty of Alchemilla is that it will grow in shade, it'll grow in sun, it'll grow in sand, it'll grow in clay, it'll grow in chalk. It's a really accommodating plant. So we'll pop that in there, and that will go to the mound, and that will be potted up. But first, it's time to visit one of your gardens, which has fully embraced the concept of letting seedlings grow wherever they find themselves.
Hello Gardeners World, and welcome to our garden in North Lincolnshire. My name's Katrina and I share my garden with my husband Carl. So I used to be quite a neat and tidy gardener. Over the years I've thought more about how we can encourage more wildlife into the garden and how we can live and let live with the other little beings that share our space. So here I used to scrape the moss off the wall to be lovely and tidy. But since I stopped, we've got ferns that have self-seeded in the wall, along the wall, even up the wall in between the water pots. So other things that have self-seeded are lady's mantle, erigerons, foxgloves, forget-me-nots, and lavender. We used to have a lavender hedge, which over the years died off, but in the meantime, it had self-seeded within the cracks between the flags on the patio, and it's doing really, really well there. It's fox and cups, which some people think of as weeds, but I just think they're lovely. And we've got campanula that's growing up there and just helping to soften the edges of the steps. We used to collect the dried up leaves from the spring flowering bulbs, but now I've been leaving them. So they'll mulch down into the ground, and they'll also help to just preserve the moisture in the soil so that we're not using as much water to water the plants. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Good boy. Good. Ned, you're spoiling it. Stop bouncing. Come here. This is not a bouncing program. It's not Ned bouncing. Go on. Right. I thought there was a really interesting lesson there, because Katrina was growing lavender, but found it was self-seeding and growing in the paths. But of course, it was telling her exactly the conditions it wanted. And that's the point about self-sown plants. They grow where they want to be. Anyway, thank you, Katrina, for sharing your garden. And if any of you would like to film your gardens and share them with us all, then we would love to see them. And if you go to our website, you can get all the details and instructions on how to do that. I wanted to quickly get the alchemilla into the ground because the quicker I can replant it, the quicker it will grow away and probably not even notice the difference. And alchemilla is really good flanking a path because it spills and drifts across. And the mound has a distinct colour theme. You can see it. It's pale yellow and pale blue. But what I'm doing today is just adding a few plants to keep that colour scheme ticking over. Now this is a verbascum. It's called Dark Eyes. It's soft yellow, but at the centre of each floret there is a deep red eye, hence the name. This particular verbascum is a perennial, but it's a short-lived one, so it's not going to last for years and years. But while it does last, it will flower profusely and will go on flowering all summer. But what you do need to do is keep deadheading it, and then it will produce new flower spikes. Normally, it will grow to about 30 centimetres. But like all verbascums, it does do best with good drainage. Now I've got other plants I want to put in. Now this is a Johnson's Blue Hardy geranium. It has wonderful blue flowers, and like all hardy geraniums, will flower over a long period. You can grow them in any soil, almost any situation. And I got a big plant of it last summer and divided it up, and I've got out of it about 12 new plants. Now, one of our best known plantswomen is Derry Watkins. And this year, for the first time for a quarter of a century, she is showing at Chelsea. So we went to her garden in Wiltshire to see how her preparations were getting on.
I absolutely love plants. All kinds of plants. Everything about them, the leaves, the stems, the flowers. There's nothing about a plant that's not beautiful. I'm probably not known for the widest possible range of plants in the world, but I have the most exciting plants. I always want the new thing, the best thing. The more unusual, the better. I'm always on the lookout for something new, something exciting. Oh, yes. For the first time in 25 years, I'm going back to do Chelsea again. I can't quite believe it. 25 years ago, I was doing a plant fair sometimes twice every weekend. I was doing 2 or 3 big RHS shows every year. It was my whole life, 24 hours a day. I didn't have time to blink. And it was too much. I gradually decided that what I really wanted to do was have a wonderful garden. Purple is my color. I just do purple in a big way. I really, really like purple. This is Lunaria Corfu Blue. This sows itself just like ordinary honesty, but the original plant doesn't die. They develop tuberous roots and they come back from the tuber. Therefore, the following spring, the second blooming is sometimes 2 months earlier than ordinary honesty blooms, which is just fabulous. I did Chelsea as my last ever show. It was an amazing learning experience. And when I came to make this garden, I was relying on that experience. We did an exquisite exhibit, black and white, just black and white. It made it absolutely stand out. I mean, everything else at Chelsea was flousy and full of flowers and color and shouting at you. And this was just, I'm very sophisticated. It was so cool. So this is the most amazing polygonatum Solomon seal called Betberg with this beautiful purple flush to the stem and to the leaves. Underneath each arching stem, there'll be little white flowers pretty soon. Just amazing, subtle, sophisticated, almost sinister, dark foliage. I think this is pretty unusual. I never see them for sale. This is my one plant, so I'm not ready to divide it yet, but I just absolutely love that purple flush in it. I didn't realize it had been 25 years since I'd done Chelsea. Somebody else noticed that. I had never thought about it, but somebody on the Plant Fairs Roadshow came and asked me if I would be interested in doing an exhibit with them at Chelsea. They're a collection of nurseries who run plant fairs in the southeast, and they asked me if I'd do this Chelsea exhibit with them, where we each do a little exhibit. The idea that I could do it for fun and not be so serious about it appealed to me. And the idea of doing it with them, that we could cooperate and help each other, and I just thought I could do it, and I will. So I've pulled out all the plants that I'm thinking about using for the garden part of my exhibit. There's going to be Orleas sweeping all the way through it. I'm hoping the Mathiolas, they look to me like they're going to be perfect. If I just have one plant on the stand in flower, the whole marquee will know about it. It just smells phenomenal. Because I don't do exhibits anymore, I no longer remember how far ahead you have to be. So the buds that are tight now, are they going to be open for Chelsea, or are they going to be finished for Chelsea? What I'll have to do is have some plants that are in bud now and some plants that aren't there yet, in the hopes that one of them will be right for Chelsea. The display is a circle with hardy plants. In the circle is a square, which is raised up. That's where the tender plants go. This is my glasshouse, my greenhouse, designed by my husband to my exact specifications. The entire top wall opens, the entire bottom wall opens, both ends open. The ventilation is perfect. And that's the most important thing, really, with keeping your plants healthy, is maximum ventilation, maximum light. They just love it. You know, diseases and pests thrive when there isn't enough ventilation. The plants in here, from my point of view, they're often the most beautiful, the tender ones. They come from places which don't experience frost. They don't understand that winter is coming, so they go on blooming and blooming and blooming, so they're really valuable to the gardener. Only the best plants, only the plants that I absolutely adore, are allowed in. This is Helichrysum cocoa. It's nice and crackly. Crackle, crackle. Well, the one that's definitely going to Chelsea is probably my #1 favorite pelargonium. This is Ardens. I just love this plant, that color. It's fiery, intense, small, but perfectly formed, perfectly formed. Pelargoniums are fantastic. They need absolutely perfect full sun. They want maximum light. They won't bloom otherwise. They grow fine, but they're not going to bloom. What else have we got? Voodoo. This is a rather shabby old plant, but it's full of flower, kind of sultry and serious. A lot of pelargoniums are pretty. This isn't pretty, this is beautiful. That's different. What would I like visitors to come away thinking? That they are in love with plants. I want them to fall in love with every plant at Chelsea, but particularly my plants, of course.
Well, I look forward to seeing you at Chelsea, Derry, and it's not long now. Now, this wooden greenhouse at Longmeadow, I've been using as storage all winter, and I suspect most of us use our greenhouses in that way to protect those plants that would succumb to frost, or in the case of pelargoniums, too much wet. But very soon we can start taking them out. The aeoniums, for example, I always put outside after Malvern, so that's a couple of weeks' time. By the way, you notice these are flowering. That means it's the end of that particular stem. So if your aeonium flowers, you're going to have to cut it back down here where there is a side shoot, and if there isn't a side shoot, right back at the base. Some plants, like the cacti, are much better in here because it keeps them drier. In this part of the world, it can rain very heavily at any time, and that can do as much damage as cold. But on this side, we've got a combination of fuchsias and pelargoniums. Both of them are perfectly happy over winter because both of them are kept very dry. But now we're going into spring and very soon summer. The needs differ. Pelargoniums love bright sunshine, need watering once a week at the most, and they love dry air. Whereas the fuchsias do best in light shade, they hate the wind, and they like slightly more humid, moist air. So the two aren't really easy bedfellows. So what I'll do is I will take most of the fuchsias out, some like this one. This is Fuchsia arborescens. Doesn't look like a fuchsia, but it is. That's tender and will fare perfectly well in here. And this pelargonium, Pseudoides, which has got these wonderful, intense burgundy little flowers, does very well in this particular greenhouse. But the important point is to work out what's best for the plant and then give it the right place. Whereas in winter, of course, we just lump them all in together. And while you're sorting out the plants in your greenhouse ready for summer, not a bad idea to give it a really good spring clean. Now, still to come on today's programme. Arit visits Sarah Raven in East Sussex to discover which dahlias are ideal for pollinators.
With the tidying up of the landscape and the countryside, we've wiped out a lot of really important pollens and nectar sources. So if you have dahlias in your garden, you get them all.
And we meet an allotment gardener who has created her perfect plot.
My strawberries here, perpetual strawberries, and they've done really well. I had the first crop early in spring, and now they're flowering, little heads off. Smashing.
Come on then. He's happy. Right, I want to do an experiment. Most seeds germinate better when they've got some heat, and quite a few seeds, particularly at this time of year, for tender plants, need heat. For example, I've got some zinnias here, and they won't germinate happily if it's below about 20 degrees, so you need some sort of source of heat. Now, I've got a greenhouse, which is great. A lot of people grow seeds on a windowsill above a radiator, and that works well. But you can also buy small propagators that have an electric source of heat. So I want to grow the same seed 3 different ways. One tray I'll put compost in and just put them on a windowsill in a warm room. The other I'm going to put on the same windowsill, but I'm going to put in a polythene bag, which will keep the moisture in. And the third one, I'm going to use this propagator. And the basis of this is simple. It's simply a glorified seed tray with an electrical connection which heats a coil underneath. It has an absorbent pad in the bottom which holds moisture, and that's really quite important, and then a cover which keeps in moisture. And I'll put the same seed into each, and we'll just see which germinates better. So, I'm going to fill the seed trays with the same compost. Any decent peat-free compost will do the trick. This is where I need my glasses. Now I'll try and sow them thinly, and try and sow the same amount. Right, I'm going to cover these with a little bit of vermiculite, but a little bit of potted compost would do just as well. Just lightly cover them. Right, the next stage is to take them to windowsill. And off we go. Well, we'll check up on those in a few weeks' time and see which germinate best, and we'll follow the progress. Now, it's that time of year when the solitary bees are really evident. Solitary bees, of which there are far more than honeybees in this country, are really important pollinators. And they use this wall a lot. And the mortar, the lime mortar, is completely eaten away by bees. And when you look inside, there are little holes, and those are their nests. So if you've got an old wall that is a bit decrepit, don't be in a hurry to fill it, because that's a natural bug hotel. Now, Arit went down to Perch Hill Farm in East Sussex to visit Sarah Raven, because Sarah has been adapting her gardening and how she grows things and what she grows to cope with the vagaries of climate change and also to encourage as much wildlife in her garden as possible.
The past few years, we have seen crazy weather patterns, freezing cold springs followed by record-breaking summer temperatures and then a deluge of rain. Our gardens have been really battered and bruised. And it's our plants that are having to cope with these extremes more than ever before. But worry not, because there are people out there who are trialling and breeding plants so that the ones that end up in our shopping baskets are working hard as possible to be beneficial to wildlife and resilient to the weather. And one of those people is Sarah Raven. Sarah is one of this country's most passionate gardeners, cooks and critically acclaimed writers. She has planted, grown and harvested a wealth of flowers and food from a 1.5 acre plot here in Sussex. There is perhaps no better time or place than late summer to indulge in one of Sarah's real passions, dahlias. So what specifically is it that you love about dahlias?
So much, so much. Just for me, they're kind of almost the perfect garden plants. There are dahlias that look like cosmos, there are dahlias that look like sea anemones, there are dahlias that look like Shetland pony rosettes. There are dahlias for every taste, every colour pretty much. They're incredibly easy to grow. With climate change, they're hardy. So once the frosts come, we cut them back, leave about that much stem, and then put them under, honestly, 15 centimetres of mulch, a big label, and then just leave them to get on with it. Certainly in this part of the UK, we haven't lost a dahlia in 20 years doing that. And people will say, but that's not true in the north. Well, we went to -9, 5 nights in December and into January last year, and we didn't lose them. They're fantastic for cutting. They flower from July until November, sometimes December here. For pollinators, they're particularly important because with the tidying up of the landscape and the countryside, we've wiped out a lot of really important pollens and nectar sources. So if you have dahlias in your garden, you get them all.
I love this, Sarah. What is this one?
Yeah, that's apricot desire, and that's a new water lily type. A lot of the water lilies were originally bred for floristry because they're historically been the ones that have a better vase life.
Right.
These are the really trendy ones at the moment, which are the bicolours.
Oh.
Which I find a bit edgy. I mean, some of them I like, but the florists absolutely love those. They had gone out of fashion, but they're now coming back into fashion, and with that, just huge investment with breeding. And so there's lots of breeding in New Zealand, there's a lot in America, there's a lot in Holland. We're doing a bit here. We'll select the things that look interesting for us for the pollinators and for the sustainability, really. So we did breeding for cut flowers, but we're now moving much more towards pollinators. So this is where we're doing our own mini breeding programme.
Okay.
And so all these are from seed that we collected last year. So this is a variety called Heroine, which has been bred for containers, but it's got big showy flowers, but they're still quite graceful. And we've crossed it with Waltzing Matilda, which is a semi-double, which is one of our absolute favourites.
Yeah, I know Waltzing Matilda.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
look at that.
I mean, they don't always look like a cross between the parents, but that is exactly what we wanted, really. And then this is one we definitely are selecting, which I just totally adore, and I've really never seen anything like that. So it's got this beautiful crimson reverse and then this sort of amazing soft apricot yellow. This is Blue Bayou, which is an amazing anemone flower variety. And what that means is that you've got this flower within a flower like that.
Yeah.
And that's the classic characteristic of the anemone flower group. And they are brilliant for pollinators, as are what I've got here. So this is a collarette. You can see there's a collar of petaloids there. You can see with all those, you can see the pollen and the nectar is at the middle of the flower. And that's the key thing for the pollinators. And Blue Bayou, which we've grown here for the longest now, probably 15 years. And this is fantastic for red admiral butterflies. So when you come down here sometimes on a sunny evening, you know, it's like confetti almost. It's incredible.
Sarah, there's so much going on across the garden. How do you weave sustainability into it as well?
I started life growing things from seed, and I've kind of gone back to that a lot. So we really try and collect quite a lot of our own seed to make it more sustainable. The other thing that I really like about collecting our own seed from here is that every time you do it, you're selecting for your own microclimate. If you buy in seed all the time, you're actually selecting for somewhere else. So actually by harvesting your own seed, you're saving money, but each time you make it better and better suited to your place. And with the whole climate change and the variability of the sort of summers we're having, I think that gets more and more important, really. So yeah, now's the time.
While Sarah trials and breeds on a large scale, Sarah is still a gardener like the rest of us, and she has been devising ways of being sustainable in her own gardening practices.
This whole area is on the north face of the house, so it's quite shady. And actually, when we came here, it was just like gravel and kind of mossy. So we bricked it, and yeah, it's just become where we do the pots because, of course, sheltered by the farmhouse, they're not given this full-on hot sun. And we've found over the years that we can decrease our watering by about a third of the pots here than the pots on the south face of the farmhouse. So it just makes them lower maintenance and more sustainable, really.
No, I mean they look lovely. I mean they're obviously getting enough sun to flower.
Really, the first thing for sustainability is you've just got to stop using chemicals. So if you see everywhere here, all the cracks have got grass and what would be called weeds in them. But I love them, I celebrate them. And then just in terms of how you manage your water, so we don't have any irrigation here at all. So everything's hand watered, and it just makes you so much more aware with, you know, of what you're using, I suppose. And that's the kind of awareness, but also you'll see around the garden we have lots of shallow trays and bowls. So those are for the bees and for bird baths. And you'll see the bees coming in that need vast quantities of water on a hot day to take back to their hive. Plants for birds. In this small area, we have this lovely large berried hawthorn called Crataegus prunifolia, because it's got a sort of, looks like a fruit tree. And they love that. And then we have grasses like this, Panicum frosted explosion, as well as lots and lots of flowers for butterflies and bees, really. If you just layer those things in and have abundance, not over tidy, then you're onto a really biodiverse garden.
Yeah.
Sustainable biodiverse garden.
It makes so much sense. It makes so much sense.
I was really struck by Sarah's point that by collecting your own seed, you're creating a seed bank that is absolutely particular to your garden, with its own climate and its ecosystem and its soil biome. And I think that's an incentive for all of us to do more seed collecting. Now, in terms of vegetables, the vegetable garden has sat pretty much untouched all spring because it's been ridiculously wet and claggy, or just cold because our heavy soil, when it's wet, takes ages to heat up. However, I can now start planting out, which I would have done perhaps a month ago. And I'm going to start with some beetroot. Here are the plants I've sown in plugs. Nice, healthy plants. It's a variety called Bolt Hardy that I sowed about 5-6 weeks ago. When you grow things in cells or plugs, you do have to check them occasionally to see if they're ready to plant out. The rule of thumb is that it's ready when it will hold in your hand, and yet you can see roots, but you can also see soil. But this will be fine. Beetroot are quite slow to get going, so don't worry if you don't see a lot of growth for a few weeks. And then I space them about 8 inches apart. If you haven't yet done any vegetable gardening at all, and you feel that you're falling behind, don't worry. I have often not started sowing or planting vegetables before May, and yet caught up later on in the year. And it's not too late to sow beetroot direct if you've got seed. It's so nice to be back in the vegetable garden, working the soil, hearing the birds, and knowing it's part of the rhythm of creating food, which gives me so much pleasure, and I know it does so for many people. And we went to North Yorkshire to visit an allotmenteer who has made her allotment her sanctuary.
I'm a very keen gardener. I've always loved gardening, ever since being a child. I come down here every day if I can, and I can come down and I can be down here 6 hours and it feels like an hour. It's really good. My name is Maggie Boyd at a little place called Knaresborough, and I'm the only wheelchair user on this plot. So I put my name down in the allotment for 4 years ago. I had to wait a while, then I got the phone call. I was really excited. In fact, I rang my daughter and said, I've got the allotment, I've got it. This plot, when I took it on, it was actually from an old people's home, and they had 2 massive big beds, which is fine, but they're too wide for a wheelchair user. So I had 4 smaller beds made, but by 12 foot by 4 foot wide, which is more practical. You see, there's perpetual spinach here. That was put in last year, it's done really well. I've got raspberries, I've got my strawberries, and over here, I'm going to plant potatoes. So I was born in 1962. At the time, it was a thalidomide. For those of you who don't know about thalidomide, it was a tablet that mothers were given to stop morning sickness. And sadly, it affected the fetus. So babies were born with different types of deformities. Thousands died. I was affected, my lower limbs and my thumbs. I wore prosthetics for 37 years and decided that I was quite happy to be in a wheelchair. Planting some potatoes, called Valor. So this is a long-handled trowel, which is great from a wheelchair point of view. So you can just reach over. And then I found this little tool recently, which is great. It's got double-edged, and it's a lovely way, and it's great for weeding, or if you want to make a groove to sow seeds, you can just push it along like that. Allotment life is absolutely fantastic. I'd say it's a lifestyle for me, a complete change of lifestyle. I grow what I want, I eat what I want, and I have the pleasure of growing it. And I have the pleasure of talking to other people who feel the same way. Found that since having my allotments, I just want to be here all the time. You get sucked in. Once you start, you get sucked in. As you can see, things have progressed since you last came to see me. I've grown melons. I've got melons outside. I've got runner beans. I've got sweet corn. I've got peas. They've done really well. My strawberries here, perpetual strawberries, and they've done really well. I had the first crop early in spring, and now they're flowering, little heads off. Really good. Sorry. Smashing. Oh, you're getting your hands in the soil. You can't, there's nothing better. You can't beat a homegrown potato. It's worth the wait. 2 plants these are off. Look at the size of them. What I'm really excited about is a veg that I've not grown before. This is a trompeccino. First time I've grown them. This is a really big one, but I've got other big ones and they've done so well over the arches. And look at the size of the flower. Beautiful. But they absolutely love it round here. They really do. Yeah, look at that. Just like that. Look at the size of that. So I'm at the top of my allotment right now, and this is the pond we built last April. Had loads of frog spawn this year, and it's worked out really well, and I love it. And all the flowers they've chosen are all for wildlife. Bees love it. And I've had dragonflies lay their eggs on here this year, which I'm really pleased about. I've actually seen them do it, so it's good. You'd be amazed what wildlife it attracts. And I just think it finishes off the plot really nicely after all the veg, the hurriedness of gardening. It's a pleasure after all the work to just be able to come back down here. It's lovely. My allotment is my go-to place. I just love it. I don't know, it's just the whole thing of gardening, having your hands in soil, it sort of grounds me. I feel like it holds me in place mentally as well. It's just a really good place to go.
As it happens, I've been to Maggie's allotment in Knaresborough, and I can tell you it's a really wonderful site. But then most allotments are fantastic. Now, it's far too early to plant tomatoes outside unless you live in a very warm, sheltered place. But for most of us, at this time of year, this is a job for a greenhouse if you've got one. It doesn't have to be in the soil, it could be in a pot, but they will need some protection. Because what tomatoes really dislike is big variations in temperature. So in May, we can have quite warm days, but also quite cold nights. So if we're outside, I'm going to wait another month. I sowed these in February. This is a variety called Cour de Bouet, or ox heart. And there are side shoots growing. So just pinch that out. And the reason you do that is to focus all the energy of the plant into the flowering trusses. Now these tomatoes are going to be here until September or even October, and they need support, and you can use bamboos, you can use any type of trellis, anything that is robust. But what I've found over the years is this system, which is permanent wires and then just these strings. So the string goes in the bottom. Going to take the plant out the pot and push it down on the string so the string is nice and taut. Fill back round it and firm it in really well, like that. And you don't have to tie them to it, you just twist the tomato round it. The reason why you plant tomatoes fairly deep, and there's no harm in planting them 6 inches deep, certainly up to the first leaf, is partly to anchor them, and that's important, but also because the bit of the stem that is buried will develop roots. And the more roots it has, the more nutrients and the more water it will take up. And that means the healthier the plant will be and the better the fruit will be. it's time to bring the citrus plants out from the protection of the greenhouse into the open air here in the Paradise Garden, which is really where they belong. They're all part of this idea of fruit and colour and fragrance and water, which is essential to the Paradise Garden. And I don't know if you've noticed, but there are aquilegias that have seeded themselves in the pot. We saw them in the cottage garden where there was just the foliage, but of course, because this has been in the greenhouse, it's grown, it's flowered, and it just shows they will seed wherever they can, and I love them. Of course, I'll leave that. When and if you bring your oranges or lemons out from protection, whether it's a greenhouse or a conservatory or wherever you've been keeping them over winter, don't worry if they look a bit scruffy and a bit jaded. Give them a good soak and then let them dry out completely, and then another good soak. Also, they should drain. So put them up on chocks and then feed them once a week. Give them a liquid seaweed feed, and then when you see plenty of new growth appearing, then you can think about pruning, but we'll do that in a few weeks' time. And that's it this week. Next week, Arit and Joe will be at the Royal Horticultural Society's Malvern Spring Festival, and that's at our normal time of 8 o'clock. And I'll see you back here at Longmeadow in a couple of weeks' time. So until then, bye-bye.